Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you all like it, please like and subscribe, and hope you all enjoy it. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, so my name is Adam Kachavik, and I am sitting on a shaving horse. A shaving horse you sit on it like a horse. That's why they call it a horse. And the shaving part is that you'd put a piece of wood in there. I can push it down with my foot and hold it, so that way I could take a draw knife and shave the wood. Keeping it at a 40, if I try to shave it like this, it's harder to dig into. So if you put it at a 45-degree angle, you get a better cut in there. The nice thing about the shaving horse is, as I'm working on it, if I was using a modern vise, I'd have to put my tool down, turn the crank, move the piece, then crank it back up. And that would take a lot of work, right? A lot of time. But with this, all I have to do is lift my foot up. I don't even have to. I just lift my foot up, change it. Don't have to let go of my tool, push it down again, and now I can cut the other side. So it's a lot quicker, I find, than a modern day vise. Very excellent. Get your feet down there first. And there's other methods you can do. Like if I could use it to just go this way too. Use the knife backwards, pushed up against it.
It has the same effect. Huh.
If I need to go that way. The thing about it is that in the 18th century, this was common among every household would have something like this to work on. If you're going to do any woodworking, it's an excellent tool. Yeah. So, I have been working on a mallet today, and been using this as, of course, it's straight on one edge, and then the other side it's beveled, so that way when I cut into it, the wood moves away from the work. If it was beveled on both directions, it would just cut in. So this definitely makes it, so you can flatten things out with it. I've been trying to trim it down so I'd have a handle on it, and just to pound things.
Okay. Making some onion pies right there.
I'm going to talk about the 1760 events, which occurred actually beginning yesterday, 263 years ago, in western North Carolina and western South Carolina. Number one, the events that occurred here are in a war that developed because of the French and Indian War, but it is very separate from the French and Indian War. To go and understand this conflict, we have to go back quite a few years before the French and Indian War even began. In 1747, the colony of South Carolina established a line about right there, and they told settlers that they cannot settle west or north of that place. That is called the Long Canes Creek. And this is your limit line, okay? Because the people that lived on the other side of that line, and have been there for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, were Cherokee Indians. That is their territory. The British are attempting to prevent and protect native lands from encroachment. Fast forward, in 1754, the French and Indian War broke out. And this war is being fought between France, their Native American allies, and England and the American colonies, and our Native American allies. The Cherokee were our allies, actually because Fort Dobbs' commander, Hugh Waddell, 2 Virginia delegates, and a Mohawk Indian from New York, met with the Cherokee and Catawba way down on the Broad River in what is today South Carolina in February of 1756, and it got them to agree to help North Carolina and Virginia patrol and defend their frontiers. We are tight allies, right? In 1756, later that year, a few settlers start creeping over that line where they're not supposed to go. They are drawn there because for thousands of years, natives have been cultivating this land for hunting purposes, and it is beautiful prime real estate. And it looks like nobody's using it. So why not? We'll just go ahead and build our houses over here, right? At the same time, the Cherokee are sending hundreds of warriors north to help the Virginia and Maryland and Pennsylvania. And in 1758, the Cherokee sent more than 700 warriors to help the colonies and the British Army capture a French fort that had been built in downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before it was Pittsburgh. The campaign was successful, but I actually jumped ahead of myself a little bit, I apologize. Just before the Cherokee go north to do that, in November of 1757, settlers who established themselves west of that limit line murdered 2 Cherokee men and 2 Cherokee women so that they could steal their deer hides and sell them for their own. And they collected their scalps and sold those. They also blamed it on the Chickasaw, and on the Creek, and on the Choctaw, and on the Catawba. They blamed it on everyone except white people. Anyway, so back, Cherokee send soldiers, or not soldiers, but warriors north. The campaign is successful in Pennsylvania, and in September of 1758, as these Cherokee are heading home, just north of modern-day Roanoke, Virginia, local Virginia militia decided for some reason that they are going to start ambushing their allies as they're returning home. Over the course of about 2.5 weeks, Virginians managed to murder about 40 of their allies. This upset the Cherokee on behalf of the colonies and these people to be murdered by them. Native Americans in the 18th century had their very own set of justice rules. They practiced commonly what's known as blood law. In blood law, when a native person was murdered, the warriors of their community were bound. They must go to the nation that killed their friend or loved one, and you take a life for a life. It was actually preferred to take captives. Ideally, it would be children or young women who would be brought back to the towns, and they would be adopted by the families of the murder victims. The Cherokee didn't do that. They actually went to Virginia and complained. Your people are murdering us. Can you please do something about it? There was even a Virginia officer present with the Cherokee when they were ambushed. And he complained, and Virginia did nothing. To get home, the Cherokee had to go all the way across North Carolina, down this way to Spartanburg is about here. They had to go all the way down to where Clemson University is, head north, and there's a fort there called Fort Prince George. They stopped there and said, "Hey, South Carolina soldiers, Virginians are murdering us." And the South Carolinians said, "You should have complained to Virginia." In April and May of 1759, long time after the murders happened, the Cherokee were fed up. And they decided that they're going to get justice their own way. They decide that they're going to attack, and they're going to take the lives of approximately 40 settlers. And they did that in early '59. Except they didn't do it in Virginia. They did it here in North Carolina. Almost all of them lived between the Catawba and Yadkin rivers. And once the Cherokee did this, they thought, we have justice, we're good, right? We can go back to being allies. And they start attacking the French all over again. And in some cases, by mid to late 1759, their warriors were traveling as far west and north as modern-day St. Louis, Missouri. That's a huge demonstration of renewed friendship. But while they're doing that, the governor of South Carolina demanded that the Cherokee turn over all the warriors who participated in the attacks on North Carolina so they could be executed. The Cherokee said, no, that's not justice. The governor realized he asked a little bit too much, so he backed down, and he said they needed to turn over 80 warriors to be executed for the 40 lives of the North Carolinians taken. And the Cherokee said, no, that's not going to happen. So, at that refusal, the governor of South Carolina, Governor Littleton, told the Cherokee, we're going to be raising an army, we're going to send it west, and we are going to burn your towns and kill men, women, and children until 80 warriors are given over for execution. The Cherokee response was to send 38 chiefs down to Charleston to meet with the governor and try to prevent further bloodshed. The governor greeted them by saying, what business is it that you think you have here? They were put in shackles and hauled back across South Carolina, and they were thrown into jail cells inside of Fort Prince George and held as hostages. In early 1760, all but 6 of them were murdered by the soldiers in that fort. And for the Cherokee, that was the last straw. They declared war. They began attacking all over South Carolina and even North Carolina. There was an attack here on February 27, 1760. Governor Littleton panicked. He's like, oh my God, we're getting attacked by the mean Cherokee. Why would they do this? And he starts sending letters to the British Army's commander in New York City, Jeffrey Amherst, saying, the Cherokee have risen up, they're killing everyone, they're slaughtering everyone for no reason. Can you please help us? Amherst received that letter on the 24th of, I gotta get my notes, sorry. He got that note a couple days actually before Fort Dobbs was attacked, February 23rd. Amherst immediately grabbed a Colonel Archibald Montgomery, 1,700 British soldiers belonging to the 77th Regiment of Foot and the 1st Regiment of Foot, and he put them on boats and sent them to Charleston to put an end to this fighting. Those men arrived just north of Charleston on the 1st of April of 1760. Smallpox was raging through Charleston, so they were landed above the city, and they immediately marched 40 miles north to a little town called Monk's Corner. There they sat, because South Carolina had been given instructions that they were to raise 1,000 soldiers, 400 heads of cattle, and enough wagons to supply the Army's needs, along with about 300 mounted rangers, militia basically on horseback. When Montgomery got to Monk's Corner, there were no cattle, there were about a dozen wagons, there was no soldiers, there was nothing. Littleton actually just didn't want to do anything to participate in this campaign to help the Brits out. He wanted England to fix it all for him. It took Montgomery threatening to put his men back on boats for South Carolina to finally agree to supply cattle and wagons. They tried to raise troops, and when Montgomery's force arrived all the way up in Congaree, which is about Columbia, South Carolina, they arrived there on, they arrived there on the 2nd of May. And they did finally find a bunch of wagons, and he had to send wagons back and forth down to Monk's Corner several times to get all of the Army's supplies up. And they did have 400 cattle there waiting for him, but there's still no soldiers. So Montgomery, after waiting a little while, because it takes a long time to get supplies back when you only have a few wagons, on the 19th of May, they started marching for the town of 96. 96 is way out here. It gets its name because it is almost exactly 96 miles from there to the Cherokee main town of Geoe. They get there on the 24th of May. And he finds South Carolina has managed to raise 80 soldiers out of the 1,000 promised. And none of them have uniforms. They don't even have guns. It's just a bunch of dudes with a couple officers. Montgomery's pretty ticked off. But 400 mounted rangers showed up. And these are volunteers, not paid. These guys were willing to help. He gets his soldiers ready, and he also wrote a letter to his war. One of the lines of this letter said, quote, "These Indians are rogues, as they all are. But I fancy they have sometimes been hardly dealt by, and if they could tell their own story, I doubt much if they are so much to blame as has been represented by the people of this province." He's saying, I don't think the Cherokee are the ones that started this. He goes on to say, we're punishing the wrong people. It's South Carolina that needs to be dealt with. His commanding officer, Lord Jeffrey Amherst, sent him responses that basically said, shut up and follow your orders. So Montgomery's arms were tied, and a couple days later, he began marching his force all the way up that 96 miles to Fort Prince George. He decides he's going to formulate a plan. His job, his orders are to attack and destroy the Cherokee, kill as many as possible, burn their towns, force an end to this war. He decided that he wasn't going to do exactly what his orders said. He decided he was going to attack and burn towns, but they were going to try to inflict as few casualties as possible, because ultimately they wanted their allies back. It was South Carolina that wanted the Cherokee annihilated and wiped off the face of the earth. Montgomery had also fought side by side with the Cherokee in 1758 as allies. He marched his army north. Like I said, they left on the 28th of May. On the 1st of June, after traveling 84 miles, they reached 12 Mile Creek. 12 Mile Creek is right here. You see how this distance is. The modern day border of South Carolina actually goes up to here, like that. 12 Mile Creek is there. He set up a camp, left 120 of his 2,000 soldiers behind there. And he decided he was going to march around the Cherokee towns and come up from the north and attack downward in surprise. They expected to get ambushed at every turn, but the Cherokee evidently had no clue the British Army was there. 2 miles from the town of New Geowee, they heard dogs barking. They actually didn't know this town existed. It was a refugee town that had just been established. He sent the 1st company, or the light infantry company of the 1st Regiment of Foot. These are special soldiers. About 8 p.m., he ordered those men with bayonets only to attack the Cherokee town. They managed to surprise the Cherokee, and it turned into a fighting skirmish. As many as 50 Cherokee warriors were killed. There were a few women and children killed, and Montgomery, the commander, was really ticked off about that. He instructed his men that if any more women or children were killed, they would be executed on the spot, and their officers would be held responsible for that. After they burned and destroyed New Geowee, they marched another 25 miles up and around and attacked the town of Estado at about 3 in the morning. After attacking and burning the 200 houses at Estado, they cut across and attacked the town of Toxaway. It is underneath Lake Geowee today. From Toxaway, they burned Walays, then Conoseti, Sugartown. Then they burned Qualachi. A total of 7 Cherokee towns were destroyed. They marched 60 miles in 30 hours, burned 7 towns, took about 50 prisoners, and killed close to 70 Cherokee warriors in combat in 30 hours. At 4 in the afternoon of June 2nd, 1760, They arrived at Fort Prince George, and Montgomery thought this would be enough. This will get the Cherokees' attention. This will get them to come in and talk peace. But he took it a step further, and he made sure that all the prisoners that they took were really, really well treated. And then he turned around and released almost all of them and said, go tell your countrymen, you guys aren't dealing with South Carolina anymore. It's your old friends, and we want an end to this war. Please come talk. By the middle of June, more than 200 Cherokee delegates were heading down out of the mountains of western North Carolina, Tennessee, and they were all converging on Fort Prince George to meet with them. A South Carolinian named James Welch, in the middle of the night, we don't know what day, but in the middle of the night, unbeknownst to Montgomery, he snuck out and he intercepted the Cherokee and told him it was a trap. The British are planning on murdering everybody. They've got smallpox in their camp. They're planning to infect you. It was all lies. South Carolina wanted this war prolonged. They wanted the Cherokee destroyed. Absolutely. And it wasn't hard to believe, because 6 months before this, in that very same fort, South Carolinians murdered their last peace diplomats. So those 200 Cherokee turned around and they went home. On the 24th of June, Montgomery decided that he's got to drive deeper into Cherokee territory. They've got to burn more towns. The Cherokee had also laid siege to a fort South Carolina established all the way up near what is today Knoxville, Tennessee, in the heart of the Cherokee Overhill settlements. That fort's under siege. They've got to get that siege lifted. They've got to cover about 140 miles. So on the 24th of June, towns along the way, and they made it to, if anybody's familiar with Clayton, Georgia. At Clayton, Georgia, the army turned north and followed the rivers north, straight up to the North Carolina border where the town of Otto now stands, and 8 miles south of the modern town of Franklin, North Carolina, which is the Cherokee town of Niquosi. The Cherokee set up an ambush. The Rangers, the South Carolinians at the front of the column, 50 men, walked right into the ambush. And immediately the commanding officer was shot, and it sent those Rangers into a panic. Montgomery dispatched the 1st Regiment of Foot's Grenadier Company and Light Infantry Company, along with the 77th Regiment's Light Infantry and Grenadier Companies, pushed them right into the Cherokee lines, who were up on the sides of mountains, firing down at the British soldiers in this force. He forced his men forward, trying to get the Cherokee to back off, but he couldn't get them dislodged. So he formed 4 companies of the 1st Regiment of Foot and pushed them against the Cherokee right, and they were driven back into a field in the middle of the valley. The 77th was then pushed forward, and together they started creeping up the hills, but they could not get the Cherokee out of their positions because the Cherokee are largely armed with rifles. The British guns can only get, you're only going to be able to hit a target at about 100 yards in the best, but rifles, they can pick people off at 200, even 300 yards. So the Cherokee are able to keep the British at bay, and they keep trying to get closer to the Cherokee. Eventually, Montgomery decided the best thing to do would be to clear the ambush zone, and he drove his men hard north so they could get out of the kill zone. It took 4 hours for them to clear that. As they start getting north out of the kill zone past Echoe Pass, the Cherokee shifted their focus to the back of the British line, and they began attacking their pack horses, which were carrying all of their food and ammunition. Without food and ammunition, that army can't get much further, can it? They took heavy losses, the British took heavy losses with their pack horses and pack horsemen, but they finally managed to get all of their troops 3 miles to the north in a town called Echoe. It's just on the southern edge of today's Franklin, North Carolina. His army holed up there for 3 days as they treated the wounded. They set out patrols to try to secure their border around their little camp. And the Cherokee, the entire time for those whole 3 days, kept just randomly attacking them at different hours. In the middle of the night one evening, soldiers that were cooking a meal were suddenly disappeared. group of Cherokee had snuck into the middle of the British camp and killed these men while at their campfire. And this is the type of stuff that occurred for the next 3 days. On the, I think it was the 1st of July, I'm so sorry. On June 30th, Montgomery began readying his troops to march the more than 60 miles back to Fort Prince George to get them out of the mountains into safety. It took them 3 days. They were running and fighting the entire way. The Cherokee were constantly attacking them as they basically jogged the 60 to 70 miles out of the mountains. He managed to get his troops back to Fort Prince George, and as soon as they were back, everybody, of course, breathed a sigh of relief. They did manage to survive. They took incredibly heavy casualties, but he thought this should be enough to end it, but he can't stay back there because his troops are so badly beaten up. He's got to go back to New York City. His commander also told him, once you're done, you've got to just leave. South Carolina should take care of the rest of it. So he shortly after began marching his troops east, and he left a couple soldiers of the 77th Regiment at Fort Prince George as a reinforcement, but he brought the whole rest of his army down, and they covered that 260 miles in about 10 days. He left 4 companies of one of the regiments in South Carolina as a security measure against the frontier, and he took the rest of his troops north to New York City. And everything should have been over, right? Well, once the Cherokee defeated him in that big battle on June 27th, they were really emboldened. They went and they captured the fort near Knoxville, Tennessee. They captured the whole garrison, but then they released them all. They signed a pact that said that the garrison of the fort would leave all the guns and ammunition for the Cherokee, and they were allowed safe passage back to Charleston. When the Cherokee got into Fort Loudon, they discovered that the garrison did not abide by the treaty. So the Cherokee, really ticked off, went and caught that garrison. People love to call it a massacre. There was 140, mostly men, soldiers, with a few women and children. They were caught in the early dawn on the 10th of August, and the Cherokee killed 23 of them in a battle, captured every single other person, and they took them off and they held them as hostages. And kept trying to tell Virginia, hey, you guys, can we please make a peace treaty now? And then Jeffrey Amherst, the British commander of all of North America, kept telling Virginia, you can't make a peace treaty with the Cherokee. It's got to be done through Charleston. Of course, Charleston doesn't want a peace treaty. They want genocide. In early 1761, Britain ended up sending a second army back to South Carolina, and it did very much the same as the previous army, except the commanding officer. I'm going to read a little bit of a longer passage here, if I can find it. Lieutenant Colonel James Grant, who had served under Montgomery in 1760, he said, I fancy the Indians have been the worst used, and yet I believe that the greatest part of them are sorry for what has been done and would be glad to make peace if they knew how to bring it about. A circumstance which I have learned from Captain Stewart confirms me of this opinion. The headmen were coming down in a body to make a peace treaty with Colonel Montgomery, until one Welch, a trader employed as a linguist, sent them notice by the Raven, a Cherokee Indian, that our good treatment of the prisoners was all a feint, that we might get the headmen together in order to put them to death. the treatment of their hostages had met with, murdered at Fort Prince George, induced them to believe that this report the more readily. And so to that end was put our making of peace, which I have never could count upon for until now, though indeed before we left this province there were some rumors to the surmise. Basically he's saying that about the South Carolinian that dissuaded the Cherokee from coming and ending the war. He's laying it out. South Carolina is pushing this forward. They want the war to continue. He ended up burning 18 additional Cherokee towns, destroying more than the homes and food of more than 5,000 men, women, and children. At the same time that was happening in June of 1761 in western North Carolina and Virginia had a second army in what is today Kingsport, Tennessee, and it was getting ready to attack and destroy the rest of the Cherokee Nation. Before that second invasion could even launch, the Cherokee were begging for peace. They finally signed peace treaties. Scattered up really hot. Yes?
So at the point at which the treaty signed, where does the relationship between the English and the Cherokee go from that point forward?
The Cherokee and the British were trying really incredibly hard to minimize the impact. They actually, one of the things that really made South Carolina mad was that the British commanding officer that burned the homes and food of 5,000 people turned around and immediately started sending supplies to the Cherokees so they would not starve to death and die of exposure. And the British then, at the conclusion of the peace, they actually forced the South Carolina to establish a limit line of a settlement, but this time it was pushed much further, all the way to 12 Mile Creek, that place where they first made their camp, which is all the way up here. Spartanburg, like I said, is about here. So about there is now the new limit of South Carolina's lands that they can settle. So they gained everything from here to here and all the way up here. The British insisted through all the colonies in 1763. They set a line that almost follows the Eastern Continental Divide, and they basically said, white people, if you settle on the other side of that line, Native Americans will murder you, and we will not do anything about it. It's your fault. They did it anyway.
So now the Cherokee didn't have any allies on their side. It was just the Cherokee.
The Creeks were instigating them the whole time. There were a few Creeks who were present on the June 27th battle.
Over here. Halt! Front, face! Watch your dress. Put your arm on. Audio, dialogues. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry to crouch up here like this, get really close. It's really hot in the sun. So, can I get you guys to move your benches back a little bit, and maybe you guys get your benches back a little bit. You guys might want to turn yours a little bit, just turn it, just to give these guys a little bit of shade. Just a little bit, just like right here. Well, that's farther than I meant, but works. All right, thank you guys. My name is Jason. I'm the site's historic interpreter here at Fort Dobbs. Guys, welcome. Now, we're getting ready to do a firing demonstration. We're going to show you how these guns work. How many of you have picked up on the theme of this event, this weekend's event? Like, what year is it supposed to be? 1760? 60? 60? And we're talking about events that happened far to the west in the mountains of North Carolina. The British had sent a small force of soldiers to South Carolina to fight the Cherokee during the Anglo-Cherokee War. And some of the soldiers they sent were the 77th Regiment of Foot, soldiers raised in the Highlands of Scotland who volunteered to join the British Army to fight in North America. Now, these guys were very quickly raised. They basically, the British had no problem recruiting troops in Scotland. It was very easy. And in fact, they recruited so successfully, they ended up having to make these regiments much larger than they anticipated. Now, these guys, most of them have no clue what weapons are, how they work, right? But in the Army, you get trained. And these guys were trained as they crossed the Atlantic Ocean on ships. And by the time they got to Charleston, South Carolina in 1760, they had a parade when they got off the ships and they showed off their skills. And it was remarked that these soldiers had excelled at what was called the Prussian drill. It was the newest version of the British Army's manual of arms. They're marching, they're loading their guns, their maneuver, everything. These guys were outstanding experts at this. And it was a point of pride. To get to that point, these guys had to go through a lot of training. And before you even get a gun, you have to be taught how to stand. Now, raise your gun like that. Pleasure. He needs remedial help. No. I'm sorry. Now, you have to learn how to stand correctly. You notice these guys are standing, their heels are not together, they're very slightly apart. Their toes are pointed outward. There's not a, nobody went around with a little square and said, this is the right angle, that's the wrong angle. It's a comfortable stance. You stand with your legs slightly bent so you can move them, because if you lock them, what happens?
Collapse.
You have to cut off your own blood supply. So you stand comfortably. You have to keep your back straight. Keep your stomach in, your chest out, your chin up. Handle arms. Shoulder your firelocks. Now, when they're under command at a parade like this, they should be looking very slightly to the right with the left eye over the center of their bodies, because all of their commands are going to be coming from this side. When you're training and you're marching, these guys have to be able to walk together, do things together. You have to be able to see what everybody else is doing. This keeps them focused so they can learn how to do this stuff, so later on they can do it without thinking. Now, to let them know that I'm going to be running through a step-by-step slow loading process, my first command, actually I'm going to turn them around and I'm going to walk through it facing you guys, because we're going to go ahead and load, okay? Right about face. Now, they're standing with their guns at the shoulder. To let them know we're going to be doing a very slow step-by-step loading procedure, I will say take care to perform the firing exercise. Join your right hand to your firelock. We twist the gun, grab it by the right hand, by the wrist with the right hand, and recover your arms. Bring the gun up in front of you. The next command is handle cartridge. The gun is brought down in the cradle of the arms. You take a small step backwards with your right foot. You push the pan open on your gun. Grab your, slap your cartridge box that holds your ammunition. Open the flap. Take a cartridge out. Cartridges are a little tube of paper that contain a musket ball and a pre-measured amount of gunpowder. Soldier takes one out, brings it up to the corner of his mouth, and awaits the next command, which is uncap cartridge. He rips the top of that cartridge off, exposing the gunpowder. He puts it down by the pan, and he waits the next command, which is prime. He pours a tiny bit of gunpowder into that pan, puts his hands on the back of, fingers, not hands, on the back of the hammer, and waits, shut pans. Shut the pan, drop the gun down in front of them, and you put the cartridge up to the barrel. To get the cartridge and the musket ball and everything in the barrel, you'd say, charge with cartridge. They tip the cartridge up, push it into the top of the barrel with the musket ball on top, and then they draw their ramrod out just a little bit, and the command is draw, rammers. They draw their ramrod out, place the tip into the barrel, and the next command is ram down cartridge. Ram it down, flip the ramrod back around, put it back into the pipes in the bottom of the barrel, and you return rammers. Return the ramrod, bring the gun up, and from here, I can tell them to make ready, I can tell them to shoulder and march around, I can tell them to do all kinds of different stuff. I'm going to tell them, make ready! They cock the gun. At the same time, you take a very small step backwards. It's a very comfortable pose. Present! They present the gun to point it in the direction of the enemy, and they take aim. The command present means aim. You take specific aim down the barrel at a target who you intend to hit. You guys might want to cover your ears. Fire! Okay. One of the guns you noticed didn't go off, right? So he's actually been having a problem with that gun. It doesn't want to spark for some reason. There's a number of things that can factor into this. The flint could be dull. It is a piece of stone that gets repeatedly bashed into a piece of metal, so it can get dull very easily. That will make it not spark. It could be that the powder in the pan has fallen out. There's nothing to catch a spark. It could be that it's so humid out, the gunpowder has absorbed too much moisture and made itself inert. Try to do a fire again. Go ahead, just on your own. Yeah, you're not even casting a spark. Go ahead and drop dump it. Now the other two gentlemen who did fire, we go through this training over and over and over so that in combat, you do not have to be told every single little step. You can simply be given the command, prime and load! And they immediately prime and load the gun without being told every little tiny step. They should be able to do this in about 15 seconds. And in combat, you're expected to be able to fire 4 rounds in 1 minute. That's 15 seconds to load and fire the gun and hit a target. Not quite 15 seconds. Make ready! Present! Cover your ears. Fire! And one went off. Let's try again. Try it 3 times. If it don't fire in 3 tries, go ahead and dump it. Just gonna go ahead and let him do it. Today's just not her day. Do you hear the delay in that? Yeah. That's humidity. When it's not super humid, that thing will go off like that. It should take about 1/100th of a second. But the more humid it gets, the slower the gunpowder ignites and combusts. So that concludes our firing demonstration. Do you guys have questions? You know all of it. I can ask you questions.
How heavy is the musket?
The long guns that the British Army typically carried weigh 9.5 pounds. The guns that the 77th Regiment of Foot carried weighed about 7 pounds. They were issued what's called carbines. These troops are a little bit specialized. They're expected to be able to move quicker. They're expected to be able to close with the enemy, be more aggressive on the battlefield, and they're given slightly smaller weapons that they can load faster and are easier to lug around over long distances. So they weigh about 7 pounds or so. It has a 37-inch barrel and it is 62 caliber, meaning it fires a ball that's about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. What are your bylocks? It fires a ball that's about 5/8 of an inch in diameter, whereas the British regular gun has a 46-inch barrel, weighs 9.5 pounds, and it fires a ball that is about 3/4 of an inch in diameter.
That's not a brown vest, is
Brown Bess is a modern term. It's actually called a longland pattern firelock. But yes, it's a Brown Bess. The first version of it. A shorter version came out in 1769 that had a 42-inch barrel instead of a 46-inch barrel. So, and you should be able to hit a man-sized target, about that big, with one of these smoothbore weapons at about 100 yards with every single shot. It's actually not hard to do with a little bit of training. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
And how do you clean it?
Give me 1 second. Trailer biolocks. Right about. Face. 3 steps to the front. March. More shady. 1 more step to the front. There you go. These arms. Lots and lots of more.
Hot water, more
Boiled
specifically.
water,